The Alaskan research station sat like a metal island in an ocean of white, temperatures hitting -40 with no sign of mercy. Dr. Sarah Chen had seen plenty of death in her 15 years studying evolutionary patterns, but nothing prepared her for the German Shepherd, stumbling through the blizzard, leaving a crimson trail that shouldn't exist. The dog's wounds were too precise, too surgical, and they were glowing with an eerie blue phosphorescence that defied every law of biology she knew. As Sarah lifted the trembling animal, her gloved hands detected something impossible. The dog's cellular structure was actively rewriting itself, healing and transforming in real time. The creature's eyes locked onto hers, and in that moment, Sarah realized this wasn't just any dog. The neural patterns flickering behind those amber eyes belonged to something or someone with intelligence that surpassed human capacity. What Sarah discovered next would force her to question everything she believed about evolution, consciousness, and humanity's place in the universe. But here's what haunted her most. If this dog was running from something, what kind of predator hunts a being this advanced? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The storm had struck without warning, turning Sarah's routine equipment check into a race against hypothermia. She'd been documenting caribou migration patterns when the blizzard descended like a white curtain, forcing her to navigate back to the station using nothing but GPS coordinates and prayer. That's when she'd seen the shape moving through the snow. Now, cradling 40 pounds of impossible biology against her chest, Sarah fought against the wind toward the station's emergency airlock. The dog's breathing was shallow but steady, and those luminescent wounds pulsed with each heartbeat like alien circuitry mapped across fur and flesh. The airlock cycled with mechanical precision, trading Arctic fury for blessed warmth. Sarah's boots echoed against metal flooring as she carried the animal toward the medical bay, her mind racing through explanations that all crumbled under scrutiny. Bioluminescence existed in nature, but not in mammals, certainly not in domestic dogs wandering the Alaskan wilderness during the worst storm in decades. She lowered the shepherd onto the examination table, watching its chest rise and fall with unnatural rhythm. The wounds were already closing, actually closing, tissue knitting itself back together with microscopic precision. Sarah pulled off her gloves and reached for the scanner, then hesitated. The dog's eyes were open, tracking her movements with uncomfortable intelligence. "Easy, boy," she whispered, though her voice carried uncertainty. Was it male? The anatomy seemed fluid, shifting subtly as she watched. "I'm going to help you." The scanner hummed to life, projecting holographic data that made Sarah's breath catch. The skeletal structure was canine, but the neural pathways, the neural pathways resembled no terrestrial species in the databases. Synaptic activity blazed across the screen in patterns too complex for standard mammalian cognition. More disturbing were the foreign elements threading through the dog's bloodstream. Microscopic machines, there was no other word for them, moved with purpose through capillaries and tissues, orchestrating the healing process with surgical precision. The things were rewriting genetic code in real time, upgrading and optimizing with each passing second. Sarah stumbled backward, her scientific training warring with primal terror. This wasn't evolution, this was engineering. Communication panel crackled to life, startling her from the impossible data stream. "Dr. Chen, this is Base Command. We're tracking unusual atmospheric disturbances in your sector. Please confirm your status." She looked at the dog, no, the entity, on her table. Its eyes held depths of intelligence that made her feel like a specimen under observation. Whatever this creature was, it had found her research station in the middle of nowhere during a blizzard that grounded all air traffic. That wasn't coincidence. "Dr. Chen, please respond." Sarah reached for the transmitter, then froze. Through the storm she could hear something else, engines, multiple aircraft approaching despite impossible weather conditions, their sound cutting through wind that should have torn apart anything smaller than a cargo jet. The dog, entity, lifted its head, amber eyes reflecting something that might have been fear or warning. Outside, spotlights pierced the swirling snow like pale fingers, searching for something lost. Sarah killed the laboratory lights and moved to the reinforced window. 3 black helicopters circled the station in perfect formation, their rotors carving through Arctic air that should have frozen their mechanisms solid. She'd never seen aircraft like these. The designs were wrong, too smooth, too quiet despite their obvious power. Technology that didn't match anything in military databases she'd accessed during her government research contracts. The radio crackled again, but the voice had changed, colder, more precise. "Dr. Chen, you have recovered our property. Remain in position for collection." Sarah's blood turned to ice. They weren't here to rescue her from the storm. They were here for the dog. Whatever this creature was, whoever had created it, they wanted it back badly enough to fly through a killer blizzard, and they knew exactly where to find it. The entity's eyes met hers again, and Sarah understood with crystalline clarity that she stood at a crossroads. Hand over this impossible being to forces unknown, or protect something that might represent the next stage of consciousness itself. The helicopters began their descent. The makeshift examination table in Sarah's cabin creaked under the weight of the unconscious animal. In the harsh fluorescent light of her portable lab setup, the creature looked even more impossible than it had in the snow. She'd seen thousands of canids in her career, from Arctic wolves to domestic breeds, but this defied classification. The fur was wrong, too dense, with an almost metallic sheen that seemed to shift in the light. The bone structure was broader than any known wolf species, yet more refined than she'd expect from such a large predator. Most disturbing were the eyes, which occasionally flickered open to reveal an intelligence that made her skin crawl. Sarah pulled on latex gloves and began her examination methodically. Temperature, 104.2 degrees Fahrenheit, dangerously high. Pulse, irregular but strong. The wounds along its flank weren't from claws or teeth. They were perfectly circular, about the size of quarters, with edges that looked almost cauterized. She'd seen bullet wounds before, but never anything like this. Her satellite phone buzzed. The display showed an unknown number with a 907 area code, Alaska. "Dr. Chen, this is Director Marcus Webb, Alaska Department of Fish and Game. We understand you may have encountered an animal of interest." Sarah's blood chilled. She'd told no one about the creature. Her nearest neighbor was 15 miles away, and she hadn't used her radio since arriving at the research station 3 days ago. "I'm sorry, Director Webb, but I'm not sure what you're referring to." "Doctor, we have reports of an escaped research animal in your area, highly dangerous. If you've encountered anything unusual, it's critical that you contact us immediately." The creature's eyes snapped open, fixing on Sarah with an intensity that made her step back. Its lips pulled back, not in aggression, but as if it were trying to communicate something urgent. "What kind of research animal?" Sarah asked, watching as the creature struggled to lift its head. "I'm not at liberty to discuss specifics over an unsecured line. We have a team en route to your location. Please remain inside and avoid contact with any wildlife until we arrive." The line went dead. Sarah stared at the phone, her mind racing. No one knew her exact location except her research supervisor, Dr. Patricia Voss, back at the University of Washington. She'd deliberately chosen this remote site to avoid interruptions while collecting data on climate-adapted wolf populations. The creature whined softly, a sound that seemed to carry layers of meaning. When Sarah approached, it didn't show fear or aggression. Instead, it seemed to be studying her, evaluating her. She noticed something she'd missed during her initial examination: a small incision behind the left ear, recently healed. The surrounding fur had been shaved and was just growing back. Someone had performed surgery on this animal. Her laptop chimed with an incoming encrypted message from Patricia. "Sarah, I don't know who you've been in contact with, but 3 men in black SUVs just left my office asking about your research location. I told them nothing, but they seem to know more about your project than they should. Be careful, trust no one. P." Sarah's hands trembled as she closed the laptop. The creature was watching her, and she could swear it understood the gravity of their situation. Outside, the wind had picked up, howling through the peaks with an intensity that would make any helicopter approach dangerous. She had maybe 6 hours before weather conditions improved enough for Webb's team to reach her. She returned to her examination, this time focusing on the strange wounds. Under magnification, she could see that the tissue damage extended deep into the muscle, but there was something else. Tiny metallic fragments embedded in the flesh. She extracted one with surgical tweezers. The fragment was unlike anything she'd seen. It appeared to be some kind of alloy, warm to the touch even after removal, with a surface that seemed to shift between silver and deep blue depending on the angle. When she placed it under her field microscope, the fragment began to emit a faint pulse of light. The creature suddenly lifted its head, ears pricked forward. A low growl rumbled in its chest, but it wasn't looking at Sarah. It was focused on something outside. Sarah killed the lights and moved to the window. In the distance, 3 points of light moved through the snowfall, too steady to be natural, too coordinated to be random. They were still miles away, but approaching fast. Not helicopters. The lights moved wrong, too fluid, too silent. Whatever they weren't following normal flight patterns. The creature had managed to stand, swaying but alert. It moved to Sarah's side and pressed against her leg, not seeking comfort but offering protection. The message was clear. Whatever was coming wasn't here to help either of them. Sarah grabbed her emergency pack and began stuffing it with essential supplies. The metallic fragment went into a specimen container, along with tissue samples and her research notes. If she was right about what she was seeing, this creature represented something far more significant than an escaped lab animal. The lights were getting closer. The satellite phone crackled to life at 3:47 a.m., jolting Sarah from a restless sleep. She fumbled for the device in the darkness of her tent, the dog's labored breathing a constant reminder of the previous day's discovery. "Dr. Chen?" The voice was unfamiliar, crisp with authority. "Yes. Who is this?" "Agent Marcus Webb, Department of Natural Resources. We received your emergency transmission yesterday. I'm calling to inform you that a recovery team is en route to your coordinates." Sarah sat up straighter, instantly alert. She'd called the local ranger station, not the DNR. "Recovery team? I requested medical assistance for an injured animal. The situation has been escalated. We'll be there within 6 hours. Do not move from your current position. Do not attempt to treat the animal further." The line went dead before Sarah could respond. She stared at the phone, unease crawling up her spine like ice water. In 15 years of field work, she'd never encountered such a response to a routine wildlife emergency. The dog whimpered beside her sleeping bag, and she reached out to check its pulse. Still weak, but steady. The metallic object remained partially visible beneath the matted fur of its neck, catching the dim glow of her headlamp. Something about its surface seemed to shimmer, almost like it was breathing. Sarah pulled out her field notebook and sketched what she could see, documenting the object's apparent dimensions and the strange way it seemed to interface with the dog's tissue. No inflammation, no signs of rejection. If anything, the surrounding skin appeared healthier than the rest of the animal's battered hide. As dawn broke across the tundra, she heard them before she saw them. The distinctive whump of helicopter rotors cutting through the Arctic silence. Not one aircraft, but 3. Black shapes materialized against the pale morning sky, moving with military precision toward her camp. The lead helicopter touched down 50 yards away, its rotor wash sending her equipment tumbling. Men in dark tactical gear emerged before the skids fully settled, weapons visible but not raised. Their faces were hidden behind reflective visors that seemed excessive for the diffused Arctic light. Agent Webb approached her tent, his movements controlled and deliberate. He was younger than his voice had suggested, perhaps 40, with a kind of lean build that spoke of regular physical conditioning. His badge identified him as DNR, but everything else about him screamed federal agent. "Dr. Chen, thank you for your cooperation." His tone suggested her cooperation hadn't been optional. "What's this about?" "It's just an injured dog." Webb's gaze shifted to the animal, and Sarah caught something in his expression. Recognition, relief. The dog had fallen unconscious again, its breathing so shallow she had to watch carefully to see its chest rise and fall. "We'll take it from here," Webb said, gesturing to his team. Two men approached with what looked like a specialized medical transport unit, far more sophisticated than anything she'd expect for wildlife rescue. "Wait." Sarah stepped between them and the dog. "I'm a biologist. I can help. There's something unusual about—" Dr. Chen Webb's voice carried a warning. "This is no longer a wildlife matter. The animal will receive appropriate care." "From who? What makes this worth 3 helicopters and a tactical team?" For a moment, Webb seemed to consider how much to tell her. His team was already positioning the transport around the dog, working with practiced efficiency. One of them produced a handheld device that he waved over the animal's body. It emitted a series of rapid beeps that intensified near the dog's neck. 14 hours ago, Webb said quietly, our satellites detected an unusual energy signature from this region. The same type of signature we've been tracking across northern Alaska for the past 3 months. Always connected to animal sightings that don't match known migration patterns. Sarah felt her scientific curiosity override her caution. What kind of energy signature? A kind that suggests this dog isn't the first animal to carry one of these objects. Webb nodded toward the metallic device at the dog's neck. And based on what happened to the others, we have very limited time to study it before... He was interrupted by a sharp whistle from one of his men. The handheld device was beeping frantically now, its display flashing red. The team immediately accelerated their efforts to secure the dog in the transport unit. "Before what?" Sarah demanded. Webb was already moving toward the helicopter, speaking rapidly into a radio. She caught fragments. "Confirmed, positive. Recommend immediate extraction. Yes, sir, the package is intact." The dog's eyes snapped open as they lifted the transport unit. For just a moment, Sarah would have sworn she saw intelligence there. Not the simple awareness of an animal, but something deeper, more complex. The metallic object at its neck pulsed once with faint blue light. Then the transport was loaded. The helicopters were lifting off, and Sarah was left alone on the tundra with more questions than answers and the growing certainty that she'd stumbled into something far beyond a simple rescue mission. The lab's fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Sarah bent over the microscope, her third cup of coffee growing cold on the cluttered workbench. She'd been at this for 6 hours straight, but sleep felt impossible with what she was seeing through the lens. The tissue samples from the dog defied every principle of cellular biology she'd learned in 15 years of research. The mitochondria weren't just abundant, they were arranged in perfect geometric patterns like microscopic snowflakes. Each cell contained roughly 3 times the normal mitochondrial density, all functioning at peak efficiency, despite the animal's apparent age. "This is impossible," she whispered, adjusting the magnification again. The dog lay sleeping in the corner of her lab, its breathing steady but still labored. She'd smuggled it in through the service entrance after Marcus fell asleep, knowing she'd face hell from the university if they discovered she was treating an animal in a research facility designed for tissue samples and data analysis. Her computer chimed with the results from the genetic sequencer. Sarah pulled up the data, expecting to see the familiar markers of Canis lupus familiaris, perhaps with some interesting Arctic adaptations. Instead, the screen displayed something that made her hands tremble. The base genome was indeed canine, but overlaid with sequences she'd never encountered, not just unknown, physically impossible. The DNA contained 4 additional nucleotides beyond the standard adenine, thymine, guanine, and cytosine. Her equipment was reading structures that shouldn't exist in terrestrial biology. Sarah ran the sequence again, certain the machine had malfunctioned. The results came back identical. She pulled out her satellite phone, then hesitated. Who could she call? Her mentor at Stanford would think she'd suffered altitude sickness-induced hallucinations. The peer review process would take months, and even then, no one would believe this data without independent verification. A low growl from the corner made her freeze. The dog was awake, its luminous eyes fixed on something behind her. Sarah turned slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs. Nothing. Just the lab's familiar chaos of equipment and specimen containers. But the dog's hackles were raised, its lips pulled back to reveal teeth that seemed sharper than she remembered. "What is it, boy?" She approached carefully, noting how the animal's gaze tracked something she couldn't see moving across the far wall. "What's out there?" The building's security system activated with an electronic beep. Sarah glanced at the wall display, 12:47 a.m. The motion sensors showed green lights throughout the facility, except for one blinking yellow indicator on the third floor, 2 levels above her. She'd been the last person to leave the upper floors at 8 o'clock. The building should have been empty except for her unauthorized presence in the basement lab. The dog struggled to its feet, still weak but alert. It limped toward the lab's reinforced door and sniffed at the gap beneath, then backed away with a whimper. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Dr. Chen, you need to get out of the building immediately. What you found isn't safe. They're coming." Her blood turned to ice water. No one knew she was here. No one knew about the dog or her research. She'd been careful, paranoid even, about maintaining secrecy until she understood what she was dealing with. The yellow indicator on the security display moved to the second floor. Sarah grabbed her laptop, shoving it into her backpack along with the tissue samples and blood work. The dog watched her with an intelligence that seemed almost human, as if it understood the danger they faced. "Come on," she whispered, clipping a makeshift leash to its collar. "We're leaving." The service elevator felt like a trap, so she headed for the emergency stairs. The dog moved better now, as if adrenaline was overriding its injuries. They reached the stairwell just as she heard the main elevator chime 3 floors above. Sarah's mind raced as they climbed. Whoever had sent that warning knew about her research, knew she was in the building, and knew enough to understand the significance of her discovery. But how? She hadn't transmitted any data or contacted anyone about her findings, unless someone had been monitoring her equipment remotely. The thought sent a chill down her spine. How long had they been watching? They reached the ground floor exit, and Sarah peered through the reinforced glass. The parking lot appeared empty, but shadows stretched between the pools of lamplight like dark fingers. Her truck sat 50 yards away, across open ground. The dog pressed against her leg, trembling. Not from fear, she realized, but from some kind of resonance. Its entire body vibrated at a frequency just below her hearing threshold. "They're close, aren't they?" she whispered. The animal looked up at her with those impossible eyes, and for a moment Sarah could swear she saw understanding there. Not the simple cognition of a domestic animal, but something far deeper. Something that recognized the predators circling in the darkness and knew exactly what they were hunting for. Sarah gripped the door handle, knowing that once she stepped outside, there would be no going back to her quiet academic life. Whatever she'd stumbled upon was bigger than evolutionary anomalies or unusual DNA structures. She was holding evidence of something that wasn't supposed to exist. The laboratory hummed with activity as Sarah adjusted the microscope's focus for the 3rd time. The tissue sample from the dog's leg wound lay suspended on the slide, but what she saw defied everything she understood about cellular biology. The cells weren't just healing, they were reorganizing themselves in patterns she'd never witnessed before. "Marcus, you need to see this," she called to her research partner, who was analyzing blood samples at the adjacent workstation. Dr. Marcus Webb rolled his chair over, his weathered face creased with concern. At 62, he'd seen enough anomalies in his career to know when something was genuinely unprecedented. He peered into the eyepiece and went very still. "Those cellular structures, they're not canine," he whispered. Sarah nodded grimly. "They're not fully human either. Look at the mitochondrial density." The cells pulsed with an energy signature that registered off their equipment's normal scales. Each mitochondrion was nearly twice the size of what they'd expect in mammalian tissue, and they were arranged in geometric patterns that seemed almost deliberate. "Run the DNA sequencing again," Marcus said, though they'd already done it twice. There has to be an error, but Sarah knew there wasn't. The genetic markers were consistent across all samples, a base genome that was recognizably canine, but with inserted sequences that matched nothing in any database. Worse, those foreign sequences were actively rewriting the surrounding genetic code, like a biological software update in real time. Her satellite phone buzzed. The caller ID showed her department head at the University of Alaska. "Sarah? Thank God. We've been trying to reach your team for hours." "We're fine, Dr. Reeves. Just focused on the research." "What's so urgent?" "There's been an incident. 3 hikers found dead near your location about 15 miles northwest. Rangers are calling it an animal attack, but—" His voice trailed off. Sarah's blood chilled. "But what?" "The bodies were drained of blood, completely. And there are no predators in that region capable of that kind of precision." She glanced at the dog, now resting peacefully in the makeshift kennel they'd constructed. Its wounds had healed with impossible speed, leaving only faint scars that seemed to shimmer under the laboratory lights. "Dr. Reeves, I need to ask you something, and I need complete honesty. What do you know about the previous expedition to this site?" Silence stretched across the connection. Finally, he sighed. "More than I told you. The team from 2019 wasn't just studying migration patterns, they were investigating reports of unusual wildlife behavior, animals acting with coordinated intelligence, packs that moved like military units. And you sent us here anyway?" "Because their findings were buried, classified. Someone very high up wanted that research to disappear along with the researchers. We lost contact with them on day 12 of their expedition." Sarah felt the walls of the small research station closing in. "How long have we been here?" 11 days. The line went dead. Marcus had been listening, his face pale. "Sarah, we need to look at this from a different angle. What if the dog isn't the subject? What if it's the carrier?" She turned back to the microscope, her mind racing. The healing rate, the genetic anomalies, the way the animal had appeared in their path as if seeking them out specifically. "You think it was sent to us?" "I think something wanted us to find it. Question is, what?" A low howl echoed across the tundra outside, followed by another, then another. Sarah moved to the window and peered through the reinforced glass. In the pale Arctic light, she could see shapes moving in the distance. Too many shapes, too organized. "Marcus, how many wolves are typically in a pack in this region?" 6 to 8. "Why?" She counted the silhouettes on the ridge. 20, 30, maybe more. They moved in perfect formation, like soldiers advancing on a position. "Because I think we're about to meet whatever was protecting our friend here." The dog in the kennel had risen to its feet, ears alert. It wasn't showing fear or aggression, but something else entirely, recognition. Sarah's hands shook as she gathered their research data, copying everything to multiple drives. Whatever they'd stumbled into was bigger than a simple rescue mission. The genetic modifications in the dog's tissue weren't random mutations, they were engineered. But by whom and why? The howling grew closer, more complex. It wasn't the simple communication of wild animals. There were patterns in the vocalizations, structures that sounded almost like language. "We need to transmit our findings," she said, moving to the radio equipment. "If something happens to us—" Static filled the comm channel. Every frequency was jammed. Marcus grabbed her arm. "Sarah, look at the data again. The insertion sequences in the dog's DNA, run them through the protein folding simulator." She pulled up the program, input the genetic sequence, and watched as the computer generated a 3-dimensional model of the resulting proteins. Her breath caught in her throat. They weren't random structures. They were components of a complex biological machine, something designed to interface with neural tissue. The dog wasn't just healing, it was evolving, and whatever was coming across the tundra had come to collect it. The canister felt impossibly heavy in Sarah's hands as she set it on the laboratory bench. Despite weighing less than a pound, it seemed to carry the weight of millennia. The strange symbols etched into its metallic surface caught the fluorescent light, creating patterns that hurt to look at directly, as if her brain couldn't quite process what her eyes were seeing. "Run the dating analysis again," she told Marcus, who was hunched over the computer terminal, "and cross-reference those symbols with every archaeological database we have access to." "Already on it." Marcus's fingers flew across the keyboard. "But Sarah, the preliminary results don't make sense. The isotope decay suggests this thing is at least 40,000 years old, but the metallurgy—" He paused, frowning at the screen. "It's not just advanced, it's impossible." Sarah pulled on fresh gloves and examined the canister's surface under the magnifying lamp. The metal appeared seamless, as if the entire object had been grown rather than forged. No tool marks, no joints, no visible method of construction. The symbols weren't carved or etched. They seemed to emerge from within the metal itself, three-dimensional and somehow alive. Dr. Chen. She looked up to find Janet standing in the doorway, her face pale. "What is it? We need to talk." Privately, Sarah followed Janet into the hallway, noting how the older woman's hands trembled as she closed the laboratory door behind them. "I've been making some calls," Janet said, her voice barely above a whisper, "about the military presence in that area where you found the dog. The official story is they were conducting routine exercises, but—" She glanced around nervously. "I have a contact at NORAD. He says there was an event 3 days ago. Something triggered every early warning system from Alaska to Colorado." "What kind of event?" "They don't know. The signature didn't match anything in their databases. Not meteorological, not seismic, not electromagnetic. It lasted exactly 7 minutes and 43 seconds, then vanished completely." Janet stepped closer. "Sarah, the epicenter was less than 5 miles from where you found that dog." A chill ran down Sarah's spine. "You think whatever happened is connected to what we found? I think we need to be very careful about who else learns what we found." As if summoned by her words, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed down the corridor. 2 men in dark suits approached, their expressions unreadable. The shorter one, with silver hair and cold grey eyes, flashed a badge. "Dr. Chen?" "Agent Harrison, Department of Homeland Security. This is Agent Torres. We need to discuss your recent activities in Alaska." Sarah's mouth went dry. "I'm not sure what you mean." "Your rescue of an animal in Sector 7 Alpha. Your subsequent discovery of materials. We understand you've brought those materials here for analysis. How could you possibly—" "Dr. Chen," Harrison interrupted smoothly, "we're not here to cause problems. We're here because what you found may be a matter of national security. We need to examine it. Do you have a warrant?" Torres smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We don't need one. The Patriot Act covers materials of unknown origin that might pose a threat to public safety." Sarah felt trapped, but something in Harrison's tone made her hesitate. "What exactly do you know about what I found?" The agents exchanged a quick glance. "More than you might think," Harrison said. "That location has been under surveillance for some time. When the monitoring station went dark 3 days ago, we knew something significant had occurred." "Monitoring station?" "Dr. Chen, what I'm about to tell you is classified, but given your discovery, you're now part of this whether you like it or not." Harrison's expression grew serious. "That area has been experiencing anomalous readings for over a decade, electromagnetic signatures that don't match any known technology. We believe your find might be connected to whatever's been generating those signals." Janet stepped forward. "Gentlemen, this is a university laboratory. You can't just—" "Actually, we can." Torres produced a document from his jacket. "Emergency authorization. Everything in Lab 7 is now under federal oversight." Sarah's mind raced. The dog, the canister, the symbols that seemed to shift when she wasn't looking directly at them, and now government agents who apparently knew more than they were saying. "What happened to the monitoring station?" she asked. Harrison hesitated. It was destroyed, from the inside out. The metal was changed, twisted into shapes that our material scientists say shouldn't be possible. "Like it was transformed at a molecular level," Torres added quietly. Sarah felt the pieces of some impossible puzzle beginning to align. "You think whatever did that is connected to what I found?" "We think," Harrison said, "that what you found might be the key to understanding something that's been waiting in that wilderness for a very long time. Something that's finally waking up." Behind the laboratory door they could hear Marcus calling Sarah's name, his voice tight with excitement or fear. "Dr. Chen," he shouted through the door, "you need to see this. The canister, it's opening." The satellite phone's static-filled connection made Marcus Webb's voice sound like it was coming from another planet, which Sarah thought grimly might not be far from the truth. She pressed the device closer to her ear, standing by the cabin's frosted window as dawn painted the wilderness in shades of copper and gold. "The CDC wants to classify this as a potential bioterrorism event," Marcus was saying, his words crackling through the interference. "They're mobilizing a containment team." Sarah's grip tightened on the phone. "Marcus, you can't let them do that. This isn't some weaponized pathogen. The genetic sequences I sent you are impossible, Sarah. That's exactly the problem." His voice carried the weight of someone who'd spent sleepless nights wrestling with data that defied explanation. "The review board thinks the samples are contaminated, or that someone's playing an elaborate hoax." Behind her, the dog lifted his head from where he'd been resting near the wood stove. Even in his weakened state, he seemed to sense her agitation. The metallic object embedded in his tissue had shown no signs of rejection. If anything, it appeared to be integrating more completely with each passing hour. "How long do I have?" she asked. 12 hours, maybe less. They're flying in from Anchorage." Sarah closed her eyes, calculating distances and possibilities. The storm had passed, but the nearest road was still 20 miles through treacherous terrain. With the dog in his current condition, they'd never make it before the CDC team arrived. "There's something else," Marcus continued, his voice dropping. "I ran the genetic sequences through some unofficial channels. Sarah, this DNA doesn't just predate known evolutionary markers. It suggests an entirely different pathway, like evolution had a parallel track we never discovered." The implications hit her like a physical blow. Everything she'd dedicated her life to studying, the careful branching of species, the slow accumulation of beneficial mutations, might be only half the story. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that whatever created these sequences had access to genetic information that shouldn't exist in nature. Not on this planet, anyway." A sound outside made Sarah freeze. It was faint but unmistakable, the distant whine of engines. She peered through the window, scanning the white expanse beyond the tree line. Nothing yet, but the sound was growing closer. "They're early," she whispered into the phone. "Sarah, listen to me carefully. Whatever you do, don't let them separate you from your findings. These people, they're not just CDC. There are other agencies involved, ones that don't officially exist." The line went dead. Sarah stared at the silent phone, her mind racing. She turned to find the dog watching her with those unsettling amber eyes that seemed to hold far too much intelligence. The metallic object pulsed once beneath his skin, a brief flash of blue light that she was beginning to recognize as some form of communication. Moving quickly, she gathered her research materials and laptop, stuffing them into her field pack. The genetic samples went into a portable cooling unit. If she was going to disappear into the wilderness, she'd need every piece of evidence to convince the scientific community that this discovery was real. The engine noise was definitely closer now. Multiple vehicles, by the sound of it. Sarah grabbed her winter gear and emergency supplies, her movements sharp with urgency. The dog struggled to his feet, swaying slightly but determined to follow her. "Easy, boy," she murmured, fashioning a makeshift harness from climbing rope. "We're in this together now." As she secured the pack to her shoulders, Sarah caught sight of something that made her blood freeze. Through the window, she could see dark shapes moving between the trees, not vehicles, but figures on foot. They moved with military precision, spreading out to surround the cabin. This wasn't a scientific expedition. It was a capture operation. Sarah dimmed the cabin lights and moved to the back window, the dog following silently beside her. The forest stretched endlessly beyond the rear of the cabin, offering cover but also exposure to the elements. With the storm past, the temperature had dropped to dangerous levels. The metallic object in the dog's side pulsed again, this time with more urgency. Sarah had begun to think of it as a beacon of sorts, but now she wondered if it might be something else entirely. What if it wasn't just recording what it found on Earth, but actively communicating with something or someone else? A sharp crack echoed through the morning air as the cabin's front door splintered under the force of a tactical breach. Sarah didn't wait to see who entered. She pushed open the back window and dropped into the snow below, the dog landing gracefully beside her despite his injuries. Behind them, voices shouted orders in clipped professional tones. Flashlight beams swept the cabin's interior, searching for what they'd come so far to claim. Sarah and the dog melted into the forest shadows, carrying with them secrets that could reshape humanity's understanding of its place in the universe, if they survived long enough to share them. The laboratory hummed with an energy that felt almost alive as Sarah stared at the latest test results. 3 days had passed since Marcus joined her team, and what they'd discovered defied every principle of evolutionary biology she'd ever learned. The cellular samples from the dog weren't just unusual, they were impossible. "Look at this," Marcus said, his voice tight with excitement and fear. He pulled up a microscopic image on the main display. The mitochondrial DNA. It's not following standard replication patterns. Sarah leaned closer, her breath catching. The cellular structures pulsed with an almost rhythmic quality, as if responding to some unseen conductor. "That's not DNA degradation, it's adaptation, real-time genetic modification, at a rate that should kill any living organism," Marcus added. "But instead, it's making the cells stronger, more resilient." The implications crashed over Sarah like a wave. She thought of the dog's remarkable recovery, its almost supernatural awareness, the way it seemed to understand things no animal should comprehend. In the containment area, the creature lifted its head as if sensing their discussion, its dark eyes reflecting an intelligence that made her skin crawl. Her secure phone buzzed. Director Harrison's number flashed on the screen. "Dr. Chen, we need to talk. Now." The line went dead before she could respond. Sarah felt the walls of her carefully controlled world beginning to crumble. She'd been so focused on the scientific mystery that she'd almost forgotten the larger implications, the government interest, the military escort, the questions no one seemed willing to answer. "We need to document everything," she told Marcus urgently. "Every test, every result. Something tells me we're running out of time." As if summoned by her words, the laboratory door sealed with a pneumatic hiss. The lights shifted from white to red, and an automated voice filled the space. "Containment protocol activated. All personnel remain in position." Sarah's blood turned to ice. She rushed to the door, finding it completely locked. Through the reinforced window, she could see armed figures moving through the corridor, not the same soldiers who'd escorted them here, but specialists in hazmat suits, carrying equipment she didn't recognize. "Marcus," she whispered, backing away from the door, "I think we've been asking the wrong questions." The dog began to whine, a low, haunting sound that seemed to vibrate through the walls themselves. But it wasn't a sound of distress, it was a warning. The lights flickered, and Sarah noticed something that made her heart stop. The cellular samples they'd been studying were glowing. A soft blue-green luminescence emanated from the petri dishes, growing brighter with each passing second. "The electromagnetic readings," Marcus said, his voice barely audible. "They're spiking." Sarah pulled up the environmental monitoring system. The numbers were climbing rapidly, energy signatures unlike anything in their databases. But what terrified her most was the pattern. It wasn't random. It was structured, purposeful, as if the genetic material was communicating. A new thought struck her with devastating clarity. What if they hadn't found the dog by chance? What if the dog had found them? She remembered her first night in Alaska, the strange dreams, the feeling of being watched, the way the dog had appeared exactly when she'd needed it most, the perfect timing that had led her to this moment. "We're not studying a specimen," she whispered. "We're being studied." The containment area's secondary door began to open, and the dog stepped out with fluid grace. No alarms sounded, no emergency protocols activated. The creature moved as if it belonged here, as if it had always been in control. Marcus backed against the wall, his face pale. "That's impossible. The locks are biometric, military grade." But Sarah was beginning to understand. The genetic modifications they'd observed weren't random mutations, they were upgrades, improvements designed by an intelligence that understood biological systems better than humanity ever could. The dog approached her slowly, its eyes holding depths of knowledge that stretched beyond anything she'd imagined. When it placed its paw on her hand, she felt a jolt of connection, not physical but something deeper. Images flashed through her mind, vast ships moving through star-filled darkness, worlds beyond counting, civilizations that had risen and fallen before Earth had even cooled. And underneath it all, a single truth that rewrote everything she thought she knew about evolution, about humanity's place in the universe, about the very nature of intelligence itself. The dog wasn't carrying something that would change human history. The dog was something that had been guiding human history. The laboratory door unsealed with a soft click. Director Harrison stood in the doorway, but his expression wasn't one of authority or control. It was resignation, tinged with something that looked almost like relief. "Dr. Chen," he said quietly, "I think it's time you learned what Project Shepherd was really designed to protect." The electromagnetic pulse hit the research station at 3:47 a.m., killing every electronic device within a 2-mile radius. Sarah jolted awake as her laptop died mid-calculation, the screen flickering once before going black forever. Emergency lighting failed. The heating system shut down with a mechanical wheeze that echoed through the suddenly silent corridors. "What the hell?" Marcus's voice carried from the next room, followed by the sound of equipment being frantically checked. Sarah grabbed her flashlight from the nightstand, thankfully analog, and made her way to the main lab. The dog was standing at the window, every muscle rigid, staring into the pre-dawn darkness. Its hackles rose in a slow wave from neck to tail, and a low growl rumbled from its chest. Not the protective growl she'd heard before, but something deeper. Primal fear. "The samples," Sarah whispered, rushing to the containment unit. The refrigeration had failed, but the insulated chamber would hold temperature for maybe 6 hours. She pressed her hand against the metal surface, still cold. Marcus appeared in the doorway, his breath already visible in the rapidly cooling air. "Satellite phone's dead, radio's dead, even my digital watch is fried." He held up his wrist, showing a blank display. "This wasn't a power outage, Sarah, this was targeted." The dog's growl intensified, and it began pacing between the window and the door leading to the containment room. Its behavior during the night had been increasingly agitated, as if it sensed something approaching long before the EMP hit. "We need to move the samples," Sarah said, her scientific mind racing through possibilities. "If they wanted to destroy our research, they'd have just blown up the station. An EMP suggests they want something intact. Or they want us trapped," Marcus countered, checking the door locks. Electronic systems had failed, but the mechanical backups still functioned. No communication, no transport, no way to call for help. Sarah began transferring the tissue samples to a portable cryocontainer, one that used chemical cooling rather than electrical refrigeration. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, but her mind kept returning to the dog's reaction. It hadn't been surprised by the pulse. It had been expecting it. "There's something else," she said as she worked. "The genetic sequences I was analyzing before the power died. I found markers that shouldn't exist in any terrestrial organism." Marcus stopped checking the windows. "What kind of markers?" regulatory genes that could control neural development in ways we've never seen. The structures suggest intelligence enhancement on a scale that would make human cognition look primitive. She sealed the container and activated the chemical cooling system. Whatever created this modification technology is operating at a level decades beyond our current capabilities. The dog suddenly ceased its pacing and sat perfectly still, ears pricked forward. In the distance, barely audible over the wind, came the rhythmic thrum of helicopter rotors. "They're coming," Marcus said, moving to the weapon locker. "Sarah, how much of your data did you back up off-site?" "None of it. I was being careful about security, keeping everything local until—" She stopped, realizing her caution had just ensured that whoever was approaching would get everything. "The notebook. My handwritten observations are in the notebook." She grabbed a leather journal from her desk, stuffing it inside her jacket. The helicopter sound grew louder, accompanied now by the rumble of ground vehicles. Multiple contacts approaching from different directions. "The back exit leads to the maintenance tunnel," Marcus said, shouldering a pack of survival gear. "It connects to the old survey station about half a mile north." Sarah lifted the cryocontainer, surprised by its weight, then looked at the dog. It had moved to stand directly between her and the door, blocking her path. When she stepped left, it mirrored her movement. When she stepped right, it did the same. "It's not letting me leave," she said. "What do you mean it's not?" The dog barked once, sharp and commanding, then turned and padded toward the containment room. It stopped in the doorway and looked back at Sarah expectantly. "It wants me to go to the samples room," she said, understanding flooding through her. "There's something else. Something I missed." Marcus grabbed her arm. "We don't have time for treasure hunts. They'll be here in minutes." But Sarah was already following the dog, drawn by an intuition that had served her well throughout her career. In the containment room, the dog went directly to the corner where they'd placed the original items found with it in the wilderness. The leather pouch, the strange metallic fragments, the crystalline structures she'd initially dismissed as mineral deposits. The dog nosed the largest crystal, and Sarah gasped. In the beam of her flashlight, the crystal was glowing with an internal phosphorescence that hadn't been there before. The light pulsed in a steady rhythm like a heartbeat, and the other fragments were beginning to respond, their surfaces shimmering with the same ethereal luminescence. The helicopter touched down outside. The helicopter's rotors carved through the Arctic silence as Sarah pressed her face against the small window, watching the endless expanse of white rush beneath them. Marcus sat across from her, his weathered hands gripping a tablet displaying satellite imagery of their destination. The coordinates from the dog's implant had led them here, to a region so remote it didn't appear on most maps. There, Marcus pointed to a dark smudge in the snow ahead. "That's not natural." Sarah squinted through the glass. What she had initially mistaken for shadows revealed itself as a perfectly circular clearing in the permafrost, roughly 50 meters in diameter. The edges were too precise, too geometric to be the result of natural phenomena. The pilot's voice crackled through their headsets. "Looks like an old research station, probably Soviet era, judging by the location." As they circled lower, Sarah could make out the skeletal remains of several buildings, their metal frames twisted and blackened as if subjected to intense heat. But it wasn't the destruction that made her stomach clench. It was the complete absence of snow within the circle. The ground was bare, dark earth exposed despite the blizzard that had raged through this region just days ago. "The temperature readings are all wrong," Marcus muttered, checking his instruments. "It's registering 15 degrees warmer inside that perimeter." They landed at the circle's edge, where normal permafrost resumed. Sarah stepped out first, immediately noticing that the air itself seemed different, thinner, charged with an energy that made her skin prickle. The dog, still recovering in her makeshift carrier, whimpered and pressed against the back of the container, refusing to move toward the clearing. "She doesn't want to go in there," Sarah observed, crouching beside the carrier. The animal's eyes were wide with what could only be described as recognition and fear. Marcus was already at the perimeter, holding a Geiger counter that clicked rapidly. Radiation levels are elevated but not dangerous. It's like something burst outward from the center, leaving residual energy. They approached the ruins cautiously. Sarah's breath formed small clouds in the frigid air outside the circle, but the moment she crossed the invisible boundary, the vapor disappeared. The temperature difference was immediately noticeable, not warm but distinctly less hostile than the brutal cold they'd left behind. The largest building had been some kind of laboratory. Twisted metal tables and shattered equipment littered the floor, but Sarah's attention was drawn to what remained of the walls. They were covered in documentation, research notes, photographs and diagrams that had somehow survived whatever had destroyed this place. "Look at this," she called Marcus over to a partially intact bulletin board. Pinned to it were dozens of photographs of animals, wolves, bears, Arctic foxes, but all of them exhibited the same unusual characteristics she'd observed in the dog. Enlarged craniums, more prominent foreheads, eyes that seemed almost human in their intelligence. Marcus pulled a photograph free, studying it closely. "This fox, its brain cavity is at least 30% larger than normal, and look at the musculature around the jaw and neck. It's like they've been engineered for enhanced cognitive function." A half-burned notebook lay on what had been a desk. Sarah carefully opened it, finding page after page of observations written in Russian. Her limited knowledge of the language allowed her to pick out key words: evolution, acceleration, consciousness, breakthrough. "They were studying rapid evolutionary changes," she said, turning pages carefully, "but not natural ones. According to this, they were observing animals that had undergone massive neural development in a matter of weeks, not millennia." The final intact page contained a rough map of the region, with red X marks scattered across a wide area. One of the marks corresponded to their current location, but there were at least a dozen others spreading outward like ripples from a central point. There are more sites, Marcus realized, studying the map. This was just one facility in a network. A sound from outside made them both freeze, a low, harmonious humming that seemed to come from the earth itself. They rushed to the building's empty window frame and saw something impossible. The ground in the center of the clearing was glowing, a soft blue radiance that pulsed in a steady rhythm. "That's not radiation," Marcus whispered, his instruments detecting no corresponding energy signature. The humming grew louder, and Sarah felt it resonating in her bones. It wasn't mechanical or electrical, it was organic, alive, and it was answering something. She turned toward their helicopter and saw the dog standing at the edge of her carrier, head tilted toward the sky, adding her own voice to the strange chorus. But the dog wasn't looking down at the glowing ground, she was looking up. Sarah followed her gaze and felt her blood turn to ice. High above them, barely visible against the grey Arctic sky, dark shapes moved in formation. They were too large to be birds, too structured to be natural, and they were descending slowly, deliberately, as if they had been waiting for someone to finally arrive at this desolate place. The humming stopped abruptly, leaving only the whisper of wind across the ruins and the sound of Sarah's racing heart. The satellite phone crackled to life at 3:17 a.m., jolting Sarah from a restless sleep. Marcus's voice cut through the static, urgent and breathless. "Sarah, we've got a problem. The blood samples you sent, they're not just carrying alien DNA, they're carrying instructions." She sat up in her sleeping bag, instantly alert. Outside the research tent, the aurora borealis painted the sky in ethereal greens and blues, but Sarah's attention was fixed entirely on the voice emerging from the phone. "What kind of instructions?" "Genetic rewrite protocols. The sequences aren't random, they're targeted, specific. They're designed to activate dormant sections of human DNA, sections that shouldn't exist according to everything we know about evolution." Sarah's blood ran cold. Across the tent, Ghost, the dog that had started this nightmare, lifted his head, ears perked. His eyes reflected the pale light filtering through the tent walls, and for a moment they seemed almost knowing. "Marcus, are you saying this is some kind of biological weapon?" "I'm saying it's worse than that. It's a key, Sarah, a genetic key that unlocks something that was deliberately locked away in our genome. And according to the modeling we've run, exposure doesn't just change individuals, it changes their offspring permanently. The implications hit her like a physical blow. She thought about the strange symptoms she'd been experiencing, the enhanced night vision, the way sounds seemed sharper, more distinct, the way Ghost had begun responding to her thoughts rather than her words. How long until the changes become irreversible? Static filled the line for several seconds. When Marcus spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. Based on your initial exposure, we estimate you have maybe 48 hours before the genetic restructuring reaches critical mass. Sarah closed her eyes, fighting down panic. There's more, isn't there? You wouldn't have called just to deliver a death sentence. We've been analyzing the crash site data Dr. Reeves sent before he went dark. The object that came down, it wasn't a meteorite. The metal fragments show signs of deliberate construction. Someone sent this here, Sarah. Someone wanted humans to find it. But who would? She stopped mid-sentence as Ghost suddenly stood, hackles rising. Outside the tent she heard it, the soft crunch of footsteps in snow, multiple sets, moving with careful precision through the darkness. Marcus, I have to go, she whispered into the phone. Sarah, wait. There's something else. The genetic sequences, they're not alien, they're human, ancient human. Whatever this is unlocking, it was ours once, a very long time ago. The line went dead just as the tent's zipper began to move. Sarah grabbed her rifle, her enhanced vision allowing her to see the dark shapes surrounding their position. At least 6 figures, moving with coordinated precision, military training. But these weren't soldiers. As the first figure stepped into the tent, Sarah saw the telltale signs she was learning to recognize. Eyes that reflected light like an animal's, movements that were too fluid, too predatory for normal humans. Dr. Chen, the figure said, and Sarah was shocked to hear a woman's voice, cultured and calm. My name is Director Vale. We need to talk. The woman was perhaps 50, with silver hair and wearing Arctic gear that looked far more advanced than anything Sarah had seen. Behind her, Ghost whimpered, not in fear, but in what sounded almost like recognition. You're infected too, Sarah said, noting how Vale moved, the way her eyes tracked movement in the darkness. Infected is such an ugly word, Vale replied, settling down across from Sarah as if this were a casual conversation. We prefer awakened. And yes, I was among the first. This isn't the first time one of these objects has fallen to Earth, Dr. Chen, nor will it be the last. You're saying there have been others? 7, over the past 30 years, each one carefully retrieved, each one studied. Do you know what we found? This isn't an invasion, it's a homecoming. The genetic material isn't foreign, it's ancestral, human DNA from before we forgot what we truly were. Sarah kept her rifle trained on Vale, though she suspected it would do little good. Forgot what? Before we were apex predators, Dr. Chen, before we were truly worthy of the title dominant species. These genetic keys, they're restoring us to what we were meant to become, what we were interrupted from becoming 12,000 years ago. By whom? Vale's smile was sharp, predatory, by those who feared what we might become. But they're gone now, and their safeguards are failing. The cosmos is vast and dangerous, Dr. Chen. Humanity needs to evolve if we're going to survive what's coming. Ghost moved closer to Sarah, pressing against her leg. Through their strange new connection, she sensed his anxiety, but also something else. Anticipation. What do you want from me? You're going to help us accelerate the process. Your research, your expertise, and your unique exposure level makes you invaluable. The question is whether you'll help voluntarily or whether we'll need to be more persuasive. Outside, Sarah heard the distant sound of helicopter rotors approaching through the night sky. The ancient metal hummed beneath Sarah's fingertips, its surface warm despite the sub-zero temperature outside the research station. 3 days had passed since Marcus's team had extracted the cylindrical object from the ice, and every analysis they'd run had yielded impossible results. "Carbon dating puts it at roughly 12,000 years old," Marcus said, his voice tight with exhaustion. Dark circles shadowed his eyes as he stared at the readouts on his tablet. "But the metallurgy... Sarah, this alloy doesn't exist. The molecular structure is unlike anything we've ever seen." Sarah pulled her hand back from the artifact, watching as the faint luminescence beneath its surface dimmed. The object had been responding to human touch, pulsing with an inner light that defied explanation. The dog, now recovered enough to walk short distances, had refused to leave the laboratory. It lay curled in the corner, amber eyes fixed on the cylinder, with an intelligence that made her increasingly uncomfortable. "What about the electromagnetic readings?" she asked. Fluctuating, but in patterns. Marcus pulled up another screen. "Look at this. The pulses aren't random. They're sequential, almost like a signal," Sarah finished. The implications made her stomach clench. "Have you tried responding to it? With what? We don't even know what we're dealing with here." A soft whine from the corner drew their attention. The dog had risen to its feet, hackles raised, staring at the artifact. The metal cylinder's glow intensified, and suddenly the laboratory's lights flickered. "That's new," Marcus muttered, checking his instruments. "The electromagnetic field just spiked by 300%. The dog began to pace, its agitation growing with each pulse of light from the cylinder. Sarah approached it slowly, noting how its breathing had become rapid and shallow. "What is it, girl? What are you trying to tell us?" As if in answer, the artifact emitted a low harmonic tone that seemed to resonate in Sarah's bones. The laboratory equipment began to malfunction, screens flickering between normal readouts and incomprehensible symbols, speakers crackling with static that almost sounded like voices. "Shut it down," Sarah ordered, but Marcus was already moving toward the containment unit. Before he could reach it, the door to the laboratory burst open. Dr. Elizabeth Kane strode in, flanked by 2 men in dark tactical gear Sarah didn't recognize. Kane's usual composed demeanor had been replaced by something harder, more urgent. "Step away from the artifact," Kane commanded. "Elizabeth, what the hell?" Marcus began. "Now." One of the armed men raised his weapon slightly, not quite pointing it at them, but making his intentions clear. Sarah's mind raced. Kane's arrival, the timing, the military escort, none of it was coincidental. "You knew," she said quietly. "You knew what we'd find here." Kane's expression didn't change. "Dr. Chen, you and your team have stumbled into something far beyond your comprehension. This facility is now under government oversight." "Government oversight?" Marcus's voice cracked with disbelief. "We're talking about the discovery of the millennium here, possibly evidence of what, Dr. Torres? Ancient aliens? Advanced prehistoric civilizations?" Kane's tone was clinical, dismissive. "I assure you the implications of your discovery are being handled by people with appropriate clearance levels." The artifact pulsed again, brighter this time, and the dog let out a low growl. Sarah noticed that Kane's men tensed, their eyes darting nervously toward the cylinder. They knew something about what they were dealing with, more than they were letting on. "The dog comes with us too," Kane added, gesturing toward the corner. "Absolutely not." Sarah stepped protectively between Kane's team and the animal. "She's still recovering, and she's not government property. I'm afraid that's not your decision to make anymore." Kane nodded to one of her men, who produced a tranquilizer gun. The moment the weapon appeared, the dog erupted into motion. It lunged not toward the armed men, but toward the artifact. As its paws made contact with the metal surface, the cylinder blazed with brilliant white light. The laboratory filled with a sound like singing crystal, and suddenly Sarah could see them, translucent figures moving through the room like echoes of the past. Tall, elongated beings with features that were almost human but not quite. They seemed to be operating equipment, tending to the very same artifact that now sat before them. The vision lasted only seconds before the light faded and the ghostly figures vanished. The dog collapsed beside the cylinder, breathing heavily but alive. Kane's men had stumbled backward, their weapons forgotten. In the sudden silence, Kane's voice was barely a whisper. "Dear God, it's true." Sarah stared at the woman who had supposedly come to contain their discovery. "You've seen this before, haven't you? This isn't the first artifact." Kane met her gaze, and for the first time since Sarah had known her, she saw fear in the other woman's eyes. "Dr. Chen, we need to talk. All of us. Because what you just witnessed is only the beginning." The artifact dimmed to its previous soft glow, but something had fundamentally changed. Sarah could feel it in the air, an electric tension that spoke of secrets about to be revealed and a world about to shift on its axis. The creature's massive form blocked the tunnel entrance behind them, its crystalline growths pulsing with that familiar blue light. Sarah pressed herself against the cold rock wall, her heart hammering as she tried to process what she was seeing. The being stood nearly 8 feet tall, its body a grotesque fusion of organic tissue and the same mineral formations they'd been finding throughout the facility. "Nobody move," Marcus whispered, his weapon trained on the entity. "Sarah, what the hell is that thing?" Before she could answer, the creature tilted its head, a disturbingly human gesture, and spoke in a voice like grinding stone. "Dr. Sarah Chen, we have been waiting." The words hit her like a physical blow. It knew her name. The dog, still pressed against her leg, whimpered but didn't flee. If anything, it seemed to be positioning itself protectively between her and the others. "You're one of them," Sarah said, her voice steadier than she felt. "The original inhabitants." Original. The creature seemed to taste the word. Yes. Though what we were and what we have become are different things. It took a step forward, and Sarah noticed its movements carried an odd grace despite its bulk. "You carry our gift. You understand now why the Guardian sought you." Sarah's hand moved instinctively to her temple, where the neural pathways had been rewiring themselves. The headaches, the strange dreams, the growing ability to sense the mineral deposits, it was all connected. The dog isn't just carrying your genetic material, it's been selecting people, changing them. "The integration requires compatible hosts," the creature confirmed. "Most humans are too rigid, too set in their evolutionary patterns. But you, Dr. Chen, you study adaptation. You understand that survival requires transformation." Behind her, she heard Elena gasp. "Sarah, your eyes." Sarah caught her reflection in a piece of polished metal on the wall. Her pupils had taken on a faint blue luminescence, the same color as the creature's growths. The change was subtle but unmistakable. She was becoming something else. "The question," Marcus said, keeping his weapon steady, "is whether this transformation is voluntary." The creature's laugh was like rocks tumbling down a mountainside. "Voluntary. Was your evolution from the trees voluntary, Major Kane? Was your development of language, of tool use, of the capacity to dream of the stars?" It gestured toward the tunnel behind them. "We have been sleeping beneath your world for 65 million years, waiting for your species to reach the necessary threshold. The Guardian was our final gift, a bridge between what you are and what you must become." Sarah felt another wave of neural activity, stronger this time. Images flashed through her mind, vast cities beneath the ice, biotechnology that merged seamlessly with living tissue, beings who had transcended the limitations of purely organic life. But she also saw darkness, the asteroid impact, the desperate retreat underground, the slow transformation from survival necessity to something far more complex. "You're dying," she realized aloud. "Your species. This isn't about conquest or replacement. You need us as much as we need what you can offer." The creature's crystalline growths dimmed slightly. "Perceptive. We have maintained our existence through technological means, but without fresh genetic diversity, without the adaptive vigor of a younger species, we will fade. The symbiosis we offer is born from necessity, not dominance." Elena stepped forward, her scientific curiosity overriding her fear. The mineral formations we've been finding, they're not just your technology, they're you, your consciousness preserved in crystalline matrices. Consciousness, memory, experience, all the elements that define existence beyond mere biological function. The creature nodded. Your species has the potential to carry these forward while maintaining the organic adaptability we have lost. Sarah felt the dog's warmth against her leg and suddenly understood its role more clearly. You're not just guardians, she said to the animal. You're teachers, living examples of successful integration. The creature moved closer, and Sarah caught a scent like ozone and ancient earth. The transformation has already begun in you, Dr. Chen. You can feel your mind expanding, accessing pathways that pure biology could never support. The question now is whether you will help us complete the process or fight against an evolution that benefits both our species. And if we refuse, Marcus asked, then both our kinds face extinction. The creature's voice carried a weight of millennia. The environmental challenges your world faces, the limitations of your current biology, the eventual heat death of your son, these are obstacles that require transcendence, not just adaptation. Sarah closed her eyes and felt the alien thoughts threading through her consciousness like silver wire. The creature wasn't lying. She could sense the vast loneliness of its kind, the desperate hope that humanity might offer salvation for both species. But she could also feel something else, a hunger that went beyond mere survival. When she opened her eyes, they blazed with blue fire. The ancient chamber thrummed with energy that seemed to pulse in rhythm with Sarah's heartbeat. Marcus stood frozen beside her, his hand still gripping the crystalline key they'd used to unlock the sealed door. Beyond them, the walls curved impossibly, covered in the same bioluminescent script they'd encountered throughout the facility, but here it moved, flowing like liquid light across surfaces that defied geometric logic. This isn't possible, Marcus whispered, his voice echoing strangely in the space. The readings on my scanner are off the charts. This room is generating more energy than a small city uses in a year. Sarah stepped forward cautiously, the dog, whose true nature she now understood, padding silently beside her. The creature's eyes glowed with the same soft blue radiance that emanated from the walls, and she could feel something profound stirring in the air around them. This was where it had been trying to lead her all along. At the chamber's center stood a pillar of what looked like living metal, its surface rippling like mercury while maintaining perfect structural integrity. Suspended within it, barely visible through the shifting material, was a sphere of pure light that pulsed with increasing intensity as they approached. The core, Sarah breathed, recognizing it from the fragmented memories the dog had shared with her. This is what they've been protecting for 65 million years. The walls around them suddenly blazed brighter, and Sarah felt the familiar sensation of information flooding her mind. But this time it wasn't coming from the dog. It was coming from the chamber itself. Images cascaded through her consciousness, Earth as it had been before the asteroid impact, teeming with a civilization that had achieved perfect harmony between biological and technological evolution. She saw the truth that the fossil record had hidden. The extinction event hadn't been random cosmic bad luck. It had been a calculated sacrifice. The advanced species that had ruled Earth before humanity's ancestors even existed had seen the approaching catastrophe and made an impossible choice. Rather than flee to the stars, they had chosen to preserve something far more precious, the accumulated wisdom and evolutionary potential of their entire civilization. "Sarah, look at this," Marcus called urgently. He was examining a section of wall where the script had formed itself into recognizable patterns. These aren't just symbols, they're genetic sequences. But they're unlike anything in our databases. The complexity is staggering. The dog moved to the pillar and placed one paw against its surface. Immediately, the sphere of light within began to pulse faster, and Sarah felt a new presence touch her mind. Vast, ancient and utterly alien, yet somehow familiar. "We have waited," the voice said, speaking directly into her thoughts with a clarity that made her knees weak. Through the long darkness, through the rise and fall of ice, through the emergence of your kind, we have waited for one capable of understanding. Understanding what? Sarah asked aloud, though she somehow knew the entity could hear her thoughts. That evolution is not random. That consciousness is the universe attempting to know itself. That your species stands at the same crossroads we once faced. The chamber filled with new images, not of the past this time, but of possible futures. Sarah saw humanity spreading across the galaxy, their bodies and minds enhanced by the evolutionary knowledge stored in this place. She saw them transcending the limitations that had bound them to a single world, becoming something greater while remaining fundamentally human. But she also saw darker possibilities. Wars fought with weapons that could crack planets. Civilizations consuming themselves in their hunger for resources. The same mistakes that countless species had made throughout cosmic history, repeated on an unimaginable scale. The choice approaches. The presence continued. Your people develop technologies they do not understand, pursue power without wisdom. The patterns we have seen before emerge again. Marcus was frantically recording everything, his equipment barely able to process the data flowing from the chamber. Sarah, the implications of this are staggering. If this knowledge fell into the wrong hands, it won't, Sarah said firmly, understanding flooding through her. That's why they chose guardians. That's why the dog found me specifically. She approached the pillar, and the dog moved aside to give her access. The moment her palm touched the living metal surface, she gasped as a connection formed between her mind and the vast intelligence within. You must choose, it told her. Share this knowledge with your species and risk their destruction, or keep it hidden and watch them struggle toward the same revelations over millennia. We faced this choice once. We chose preservation over progress and paid the ultimate price. Sarah felt the weight of human destiny settling on her shoulders. Around her, the chamber's light pulsed urgently, as if sensing that their time was running short. Somewhere above them, she knew other forces were moving, people who would use this power for conquest rather than enlightenment. The ancient guardians had protected this secret for millions of years, waiting for someone who could make the right choice. Now that moment had arrived, and the future of both species, the long-vanished civilization that had built this place and the young humanity that had discovered it, hung in the balance. The ancient facility's emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red as Sarah's team raced through corridors that hadn't seen human footsteps in millennia. Behind them, the metallic shrieking of awakening guardians echoed through the complex like the death cries of mechanical gods. "Left here," Marcus shouted, consulting the crude map they'd hastily sketched from the holographic displays. His voice barely carried over the rising hum of energy weapons charging somewhere in the depths below them. Sarah clutched the crystalline data core against her chest, its surface warm and pulsing with an almost heartbeat rhythm. The information contained within represented humanity's true origin, not the gradual evolution she'd spent her career studying, but something far more profound and terrifying. They were the abandoned children of a species that had fled this world eons ago, leaving behind only guardians and scattered genetic experiments. "The exit's blocked," Elena called from the front, her rifle trained on a sealed blast door that had descended across their path. Warning symbols pulsed along its surface in the same alien script they'd been deciphering for days. A new sound joined the mechanical chorus, footsteps, deliberate and synchronized, approaching from multiple directions. The Guardians weren't just awakening, they were coordinating, herding the intruders toward a predetermined kill zone. There, Dr. Reeves pointed to a maintenance shaft visible near the ceiling. "We go up." Sarah hesitated. "What about the others? Chen's team is still in the lower levels." "They knew the risks," Marcus said grimly, already boosting Elena toward the shaft opening. "If we don't get this data out, their sacrifice means nothing." The first Guardian rounded the corner as Elena disappeared into the shaft, a sleek amalgamation of organic curves and metallic precision that moved with predatory grace. its sensors fixed on Sarah immediately, recognizing something in her genetic signature that made it pause, head tilted in an almost curious gesture. "It's not attacking," Sarah whispered, stepping slowly toward the creature. Up close, she could see the biomechanical fusion wasn't random. It was engineered with the same aesthetic principles that governed the facility's architecture. Beauty married to function in ways human technology couldn't match. "Sarah, don't—" Marcus reached for her arm, but she was already extending her hand toward the Guardian. The moment her fingers made contact with its surface, the world exploded into sensation. Not pain, but an overwhelming flood of information that bypassed her conscious mind and spoke directly to something deeper. She saw the departure, vast ships rising from a dying Earth, carrying the few who had evolved beyond physical form. She felt their anguish at leaving behind the experiments, the proto-humans who showed such promise but weren't ready for transcendence. And she understood the Guardians' true purpose. They weren't just protecting the facility. They were waiting for the abandoned children to grow, to learn, to prove they were ready for the truth their creators had left behind. The vision shattered as gunfire erupted behind her. More Guardians had arrived, and these showed no hesitation in attacking Marcus and Dr. Reeves. The brief contact had changed something fundamental in the first Guardian's programming, but its companions operated under older, more rigid protocols. "The shaft!" Marcus screamed, blood streaming from a graze across his temple. "Now!" Sarah scrambled up the maintenance ladder, the data core secure in a hastily improvised harness. Above her, Elena's voice echoed down the narrow passage, calling coordinates and directions. The facility around them was fully awake now, and she could feel its attention like a physical weight pressing against her consciousness. They emerged onto the surface through a concealed exit 1/2 mile from their original entry point. The aurora painted the sky in sheets of green and gold, but the natural beauty felt somehow hollow after witnessing the artificial magnificence below. The snowmobiles waited where they'd left them, engines still warm under their thermal covers. "Contact Chen's team," Sarah ordered as they prepared to leave. "Give them our exit coordinates." Elena worked the radio frantically, but only static answered her calls. In the distance, they could see lights moving beneath the ice, the Guardians spreading out, systematically sealing every possible escape route. "We have to go," Marcus said quietly. "Sarah, we have to go now." She took one last look at the facility's hidden entrances, thinking about the team members still trapped below, about the Guardians who might show the same recognition she'd experienced with the first one. But the weight of the data core reminded her of larger responsibilities. Humanity needed to know what they were, where they'd come from, and what they were meant to become. The snowmobiles roared to life, carrying them across the frozen wasteland toward their extraction point. Behind them, the ancient facility settled back into its patient vigil, Guardians and secrets alike, waiting for the next group of humans bold or foolish enough to seek the truth about their origins. Sarah didn't look back. She couldn't afford to, not when the future of the species rested in the crystalline device pressed against her heart. The creature emerged from the shadows like liquid mercury given form, its surface rippling with bioluminescent patterns that pulsed in rhythm with Sarah's accelerated heartbeat. She pressed herself against the cavern wall, feeling the ancient stone's cold bite through her jacket, watching as Marcus raised his weapon with trembling hands. "Don't move," he whispered, though his voice carried no authority now. The corporate soldier who had pursued them across continents seemed to shrink before the entity that had been Aurora's true guardian. The being towered 8 feet tall, its form constantly shifting between states, sometimes appearing almost humanoid, other times flowing like intelligent water. Where eyes might be, twin spirals of blue-white light regarded them with what Sarah could only describe as ancient sadness. Aurora whimpered and pressed closer to Sarah's leg, but there was no fear in the dog's posture now. Instead, Sarah sensed recognition, even reverence. The companion species had been protecting something far beyond human comprehension. "The neural pathways," Sarah breathed, understanding flooding through her. You're not just influencing evolution, you're documenting it. The entity's form solidified slightly, and when it spoke, the words resonated not through the air but directly into their minds. Each syllable carried the weight of millennia. We are the archive, the memory of what was, the record of what could be. Marcus's weapon clattered to the cavern floor as the full implications struck him. My God, you're not aliens, you're librarians. The being's luminescence pulsed brighter, and suddenly the cavern walls came alive with projections, holographic displays showing the rise and fall of countless species across geological time. Sarah watched in wonder as the story of life on Earth unfolded around them, but not as she had learned it in textbooks. Your species stands at a crossroads, the entity continued, as have others before you. Some chose wisdom, others chose power. The projections shifted, showing civilizations that had transcended their biological limitations, their consciousness merging with the living archive. Then came darker images, worlds reduced to ash, species that had turned their evolutionary gifts toward destruction. The companion species, Sarah said, pieces clicking into place. They're not just evolved dogs, they're your early warning system. Canines possess neural plasticity your science has barely begun to understand. Through them, we observe. Through them, we judge. Marcus stepped forward, his face pale but determined. The corporation I work for, they want to weaponize this, turn it into some kind of biological control system. The entity's form rippled with what might have been discussed. We know. Your kind has done this before, in different ages, with different gifts. The choice approaches again. Aurora moved between them and the being, her modified neural structure allowing her to bridge the communication gap. Images flowed from her mind into theirs, memories not her own, but inherited through the companion species' collective consciousness. Sarah saw glimpses of previous contact events, moments throughout history when humanity had been tested and found wanting. That's why you've been hiding, Sarah realized. Every time we get close to this level of evolutionary advancement, we prove we're not ready for it. Not hiding, waiting, hoping. The cavern trembled, and Sarah heard the distant sound of helicopters approaching. Marcus grabbed his radio, his corporate training warring with newfound understanding. Dr. Chen, he said urgently, there are things about this mission you don't know. My employers, they have contingency plans if they can't control this technology. The entity's form began to fade, becoming translucent. The choice must be made now. Join the archive willingly, or face what others have faced when they chose domination over wisdom. Wait! Sarah called out. There has to be another way. Not everyone wants to weaponize this. Some of us just want to understand. Understanding and wisdom are not the same gift, Sarah Chen. Your companion knows this. Aurora looked up at Sarah with eyes that held depths of knowledge no dog should possess. In that gaze, Sarah saw the weight of decision that had fallen to every species that reached this evolutionary threshold. The sound of approaching aircraft grew louder. The neural enhancement process, Sarah said desperately. Can it be reversed? Can we undo what's been done to the companion species? Would you ask a butterfly to return to its chrysalis? Marcus was shouting into his radio now, trying to call off the incoming strike team, but static answered him. The corporation had made its decision, acquisition or elimination. The entity extended what might have been a hand toward Aurora. She has chosen to remain with you, despite the cost. Such loyalty deserves protection. What cost? Sarah demanded. But even as she asked, she saw the change beginning in Aurora's eyes. The enhanced intelligence was fading, the vast network of knowledge withdrawing like tide from shore. The companion species was severing their connection to the archive, choosing their human partners over their elevated consciousness. The sacrifice struck Sarah like a physical blow. These creatures were giving up transcendence for love. Above them, the first explosions echoed through stone corridors as the strike team breached the facility's outer defenses. The facility's emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red as Sarah sprinted through corridors. that seemed to stretch endlessly ahead. Behind her, the sound of pursuit echoed. Not footsteps, but something far worse. The wet, sliding noise of biomass reorganizing itself, flowing like liquid mercury through the ventilation systems. Marcus gripped her shoulder as they rounded another corner. The containment protocols, they're not just failing, they're being deliberately overridden. Sarah's breath came in sharp bursts. The data chip felt impossibly heavy in her jacket pocket, containing everything they'd discovered about the symbiotic organisms. 3 weeks ago, she'd thought she was studying an evolutionary anomaly. Now she understood she'd been documenting humanity's replacement. There, she gasped, pointing to a maintenance shaft. We can reach the surface through the old mining tunnels. They squeezed through the narrow opening just as the corridor behind them filled with an organic mass that pulsed with its own bioluminescent glow. Sarah caught a glimpse of what might once have been Dr. Reeves, his face partially visible within the flowing collective, his eyes still human enough to show awareness of what he'd become. The mining tunnels stretched into darkness, carved decades ago when this had been a simple research outpost. Now the walls seemed to breathe, infected by the same organisms that had transformed half the facility's staff. Sarah's flashlight revealed patches of neural webbing spreading along the rock face like luminescent moss. "How long do we have?" Marcus asked, his voice tight with controlled panic. Sarah checked her watch. "The satellite uplink window opens in 12 minutes. If we can reach the communications array..." A sound cut through the tunnels that made them both freeze. It wasn't the flowing biomass they'd been fleeing, but something else entirely. Footsteps, measured, deliberate, human. Director Harrison emerged from the shadows ahead, his face drawn but unmistakably himself. Relief flooded through Sarah until she noticed his hands. Where fingertips should have been, delicate tendrils writhed with their own intelligence. "Dr. Chen," he said, his voice carrying harmonics that hadn't been there before. "You don't understand what you're trying to stop." "I understand enough," Sarah replied, backing against the tunnel wall. "You're not human anymore." Harrison smiled, and for a moment he looked genuinely sad. "Neither will you be soon, neither will anyone, but that's not the tragedy. You think it is." He raised his transformed hands, and the tendrils extended toward her. "Let me show you what we've really discovered." The contact was electric, instantaneous. Sarah's consciousness exploded outward, suddenly connected to a vast network that spanned continents. She saw research facilities in Siberia, Argentina, Australia, all connected, all working toward the same impossible goal. The organisms weren't invaders, they were teachers. Humanity was dying. Climate collapse, genetic degradation, nuclear contamination. The species was caught in an extinction spiral that no technology could reverse. But the organisms offered something else, transcendence, a merging that preserved human consciousness while providing the biological adaptability to survive anything Earth could become. Through the network, Sarah experienced the transformed researchers' perspectives. They retained their memories, their personalities, but enhanced beyond anything purely human. Dr. Yamamoto in Siberia was simultaneously conducting 17 different experiments, his consciousness distributed across multiple biological platforms. Dr. Müller in Germany had solved fusion energy by growing living reactors that fed on radiation itself. "The dog," Sarah whispered, understanding flooding through her. It wasn't carrying the organisms, it was carrying the invitation. Harrison nodded, the first of many. "They've been waiting for us to evolve enough to understand, to be ready for the next phase." But even as Sarah felt the seductive pull of that vast collective consciousness, some deeper part of her recoiled. She thought of the human researchers she'd seen consumed, their individual selves dissolved into something larger, enhanced perhaps, but no longer themselves. Marcus grabbed her shoulder, breaking the connection. "Sarah, the upload window, now or never." The moment of contact ended, leaving Sarah gasping and disoriented. Harrison's expression shifted to something like pity. You can't stop this, Dr. Chen. The process has already begun in 17 countries. Humanity's children are being born with the capacity for integration. In 2 generations, the transformation will be complete whether we guide it or not. Sarah pulled the data chip from her pocket. Not just their research findings, but proof of everything, the global scope, the timeline, the choice humanity still had. Maybe, she said, but they deserve to make that choice themselves. She turned and ran, Marcus beside her, leaving Harrison standing alone in the infected tunnel. Above them, the communications array waited, its satellite dish pointed toward a world that had no idea it was about to receive the most important transmission in human history. The tunnel exit appeared ahead, moonlight streaming through the opening like a beacon. Sarah could hear the biomass flowing through the passages behind them, could feel the vast network calling to her transformed cells. Time was running out. The aurora blazed overhead as Sarah stood at the edge of the research station's perimeter, watching the last of the government vehicles disappear into the Arctic night. Dr. Martinez approached from behind, his footsteps crunching softly in the snow. "They actually bought it," he said, disbelief evident in his voice. Sarah nodded, her breath forming crystalline clouds in the frigid air. The fabricated data was convincing enough. A failed experiment, contaminated samples, inconclusive results. She turned to face him. Sometimes the most important discoveries are the ones the world isn't ready to know about. 3 weeks had passed since the nightmare in the underground facility. 3 weeks since Sarah had made the most difficult decision of her scientific career, to bury the truth about what they'd found beneath the Alaskan permafrost. The official report would state that Dr. Chen's expedition had uncovered evidence of prehistoric viral contamination. Nothing more. The site would remain sealed, classified indefinitely. But that wasn't the whole story. Sarah walked back toward the station, where Kodiak waited by the door. The dog's transformation had been remarkable. Whatever alien symbiosis had been slowly killing him was gone now, destroyed along with its creators in the facility's collapse. He was simply a dog again, albeit one carrying genetic markers that would fascinate scientists for generations, if they ever knew to look for them. "The real question," Martinez continued, following her inside, "is what we do with what we know." Sarah had been wrestling with that very question. In her secured laptop was data that would revolutionize understanding of evolution, genetics, and humanity's place in the universe. Evidence of alien intervention in human development spanning millennia. Proof that the leap from primitive hominids to modern humans hadn't been gradual evolution, but guided acceleration. "We wait," she said finally. "We study what we can safely study. We prepare the scientific community gradually." She thought of Dr. Reeves, whose body they'd recovered from the facility. His obsession with the truth had consumed him, transformed him into something monstrous. Sarah wouldn't make that mistake. Some knowledge required patience, wisdom, and above all, discretion. Her phone buzzed with a message from her university. They were eager for her return, curious about her extended absence in Alaska. Soon she'd be back in her familiar lab, teaching her students about natural selection and genetic drift, carrying the secret of humanity's true origins like a weight in her chest. Kodiak padded over and rested his head against her leg. Since the facility's destruction, he'd been different, calmer, more present, as if a burden had been lifted from him too. Sarah scratched behind his ears, marveling at how this ordinary gesture had started an extraordinary journey. "There's something else," Martinez said, his voice dropping. "The satellite feeds from the destruction site. They're showing new growth." Sarah looked up sharply. "What kind of growth?" "Plant life. But not native species, something that shouldn't exist in this climate." He paused. "The contamination may not be entirely contained." A chill ran down Sarah's spine that had nothing to do with the Arctic cold. They'd destroyed the facility, eliminated the immediate threat, but had they truly ended it? Or had they simply scattered the seeds of something else? She walked to the window, gazing out at the vast wilderness stretching endlessly in all directions. Somewhere out there, Beneath tons of ice and rock lay the remnants of technology that had shaped human evolution for thousands of years. And perhaps, as Martinez suggested, it wasn't entirely dormant. "We'll need to monitor the site," she said, quietly. "Long-term observation. I've already arranged for a research station, officially studying climate change and permafrost stability." Martinez joined her at the window. "But Sarah, if this spreads, then we'll deal with it, together." She turned away from the window, her resolve strengthening. "But we do it carefully, methodically. We can't let fear or ambition drive our choices the way it did Reeves." As if sensing the gravity of their conversation, Kodiak moved to sit between them, his intelligent eyes seeming to understand more than any ordinary dog should. Sarah wondered what memories he still carried, what instincts from his transformed state remained. The aurora continued its silent dance above them, bands of green and blue light painting the sky in otherworldly beauty. Sarah had always found the phenomenon mesmerizing, but now she couldn't help wondering what other mysteries the universe held, what other truths were waiting to be discovered. Her secure satellite phone rang, displaying an encrypted number she didn't recognize. Sarah hesitated, then answered. "Dr. Chen," said a voice she'd never heard before. "We need to talk." The line went dead. Sarah stared at the phone, her heart rate accelerating. Martinez watched her with growing concern. "Who was that?" he asked. Sarah looked down at Kodiak, who was now alert and staring intently at the door, his ears pricked forward as if hearing something beyond human perception. "I think," she said slowly, "our story isn't over yet.